Yeah, a little bit. The deliverable delivered.
I forget this one. Well, so they're all at MIT. This year. Everybody.
Yeah, I mean, it's
There's
the largest programs are.
They basically said no, not really. Like, certainly not directly. Basically, consensus. We're building That's true, and it's not really the same. Yeah, it's very different. Well, Bitcoin is trying to be worse than Ethereum. When I say trying to be, it's kind of but Ethereum's stable. Bitcoin is at some point, it just it remains to be seen. What this year platform creating. Well, we used to post this meetups actually. Yeah.
Check. How's it going, guys? Do I sound good?
Yeah.
Good. Are you guys excited to find out some stuff about Ethereum? Woo! Everything you ever needed to know. How many of you are here because you specifically want to know about Ethereum? And how many are going down the blockchain rabbit hole? You're just like, what is this thing? I need to find out everything I can. Come on, put those up a little proud of you, weirdos. I'm in that group. So, what we've set up today is a few different experts who are able to talk to you at a higher level about one of the companies. We're going to start with this Consensys. And they have consulted with and developed a new model which includes a hub and spoke model. It's kind of a decentralized ecosystem for companies in a decentralized space. And they just opened up an office in Chicago, or brought some people to Chicago, and they're going to tell you a little bit about that. We have a group, Nectarchain, who's going to talk about second layer scaling. But they're just going to show you some of the facts and stuff, because we don't want to bore you with things that are too technical to start off. And we're just going to kind of explain to you and ease you into the idea of what blockchain is, what Ethereum is, what the companies are actually doing around Ethereum, and if you want to build, how could you build something on Ethereum? And then for the people who are more technical, who want to hear about the future plans, we have Raul Jordan, who is a Thiel Fellow, and got a 100K grant to go and become an Ethereum developer. Is now an Ethereum developer who's working on the new implementations for Ethereum, all the upgrades and so forth. And then we have Dr. Konrad Barsky, who wrote Bitcoin for Befuddled back in like 2013, and was a medical doctor who actually worked his way as a technologist into now having a company called Forward Blockchain. Then he also runs the Chicago Ethereum meetup. So this one we want to focus specifically around Ethereum, because most of the people who are building, the developers who are excited, are building things on Ethereum, and there's a reason for that. But first we need to see how many of you feel comfortable that you could explain to somebody what blockchain is. How many of you, even if you feel comfortable, think like, I don't feel comfortable that they would understand after I explained it? And I think that's one of the most difficult things. How many of you are new to blockchain, like this is the first month you've heard of it, and you really want to get the basics out? Okay, good. Like a year ago was pretty much the entire room every time. And how many are developers? How about business people that are working on some idea, project, plan? Business person and a developer. All right, good, good. We want to make sure we know who's in the audience so we don't go too far over your head. I'm going to start with 3 ways that I explain blockchain to different people. And this is so we're all on the same framework here as we listen to them, the same definitions for different terms. The first one is you have a database, and if you're thinking of a database, it kind of looks like you're working in Excel. When you first look at it, it's a bunch of rows and columns. And when you go to change some data, you go to that row and column and you change it, and the data was what it was before, and now it's the new thing that you just typed in. Now, if we want to protect data, maybe every time we change something, we just take a little picture of that entire database and then put a new version, and then put a new version, and put them in a chain. And that's quite oversimplifying it. But that's one way to think of it, is like a database that you can't just change information, but instead you append the new changes on, so you have a track record of what happened before. Another way to think of it is like infrastructure. Okay? In the physical world, we have lots of infrastructure, and every company doesn't build its own set of roads and its own electric grid. And then every time they want to do business with each other, figure out how to connect their sets of roads. But for some reason, digitally, we've done that. It seems asinine when you explain it this way, but we really should have a common set of communication standards or protocols that tell us things like, all right, here's a road, we understand how this works, but we don't want to keep driving head-on into each other. So let's hit some lines down the middle and know that traffic on the right, or traffic always stays on the right. Or let's put some safety features up, like the guardrails, to make sure people aren't running off the road. And there's all these different protocols in the real world. When you get out of bed in the morning, you walk through a door frame that is the exact type that you could just go and buy another door. The other companies that are making doors know exactly what that is, because we've set all these standards that make it easy and efficient for people to work together. So the infrastructure of blockchain is really a big set of standards on how people can trust that they work together. And that brings me to the third way that I'd explain it, which is a set of trust that is given to you from a community. An interesting situation that was brought up was a designer from southern Mexico had made a certain sweater. And then a year later, Michael Kors was making that exact same sweater and selling for a massive amount. And that designer has to go and say, I made that. And they have proof, they have some pictures, but nobody knows when those pictures were taken. Right? And it's really just that guy versus that company. However, if there's a data source that we all contribute, not just to who can read and write into it, but also who has the ability to change that data, to fix that data, to change the rules to the game, then we have a source where instead of him going and saying, yes, I made this, it is that entire community, everybody who chooses to participate in that blockchain. So these attestations of a bunch of different people allow you to be a part of a community that agrees that this is true. There's a lot of things that you participate in this, like this. You have your local community organizations, maybe a church, or the school that has a bunch of rules, or there's the city government, and the state government, and the nation government. And there's a lot of things that we just say, yes, this is the way that we're all going to work. And we all trust that these are the rules that best make it efficient for us to collaborate together. So Bitcoin was the first application onto there. And once you have these features where you need to trust that the data is true, you need to trust that the data is true of how much money is in your bank account, right? Or else you wouldn't really use that bank. Bitcoin solves that problem in a way that anybody can run their computer on it, and you can picture that a kid runs their computer and all of a sudden has enough money for beer on the weekend, is going to tell his friends, hey, all you got to do is run this computer, and there's actually a system that incentivizes more people to run their computers. And over time, with Bitcoin specifically, it's gotten more difficult. You need more specialized hardware, but people keep buying it because they were able to make some money doing it. So this force actually makes it so there's a power that incentivizes the spread of power and the people who can choose the rules to go away from a monarchy to a democracy in a way. And this is what you're investing in when you put your money behind one of these systems, is a governance model. Now, Ethereum said if we can take all of that, those ideas of these peer-to-peer connections and decentralizing, allowing anybody to run their software, what else can we do with it? And they said, well, instead of cloud computing being, let's put it on Amazon servers and let Amazon compute this and have all the data, we're all running our computers. Why don't we send a little bit of the data to all these computers, and they can send it back to us, and then we have a computation that's done, distributed. So then we can run applications on this, and we could build other things instead of the application being built into the phone. Who here had a Razor or a brick Nokia? Right? Everything was built into the phone. And then all of a sudden you have the App Store, and any developer can build their own applications on top. That's the idea behind Ethereum. It's a computer that nobody controls. It's an operating system that instead of running your computations through the Amazon server or the Microsoft Azure server, it runs the computations in a distributed way, which means that nobody can fix your data. Hopefully nobody is in control of it at any point. And it is trying to solve this decentralization idea of who has the power to change the game. It's so early, there's a lot of experiments, but right now, if you talk to most developers, many, the vast majority are building on Ethereum. I think it's because they are being pretty transparent about things. They have built the system that has proven itself to work for a few years, albeit slow, so is Bitcoin. We're very, very early in the game. When people say 1993 or right now it's like 1993 for the internet, it's hard to remember exactly what that point was, but that point was still before people got on primetime news and said, no, the internet, I'm pretty sure, is just for porn and for gambling and criminals. Where are we today? I think this is a natural progression here. Now you have your data with you at your home on a server, then somebody else has a server, and now we're going to say, well, I don't want my stuff on that other entity's server. I'd rather have it something that's distributed. So with that, I'm going to make some announcements here or introductions here. I want to welcome John Cook. John has been contributing to CVP. You can give him a round of applause. It's fine. And I would like him to introduce himself and our next two guests. Come on up here. Go ahead, John, introduce yourself. Oh, I'm just really loud.
Can you hear me? Yeah, all right. So, a little bit about my background. I've been in the industry for quite a long time. I've seen 20 years of technology change. Started on old school mainframes, and then eventually seeing these things come out of nowhere called mobile phones. Next thing that's happening is everyone's doing things on the cloud. And I work with a lot of Fortune 500 companies and have grown with them as they've gone through their kind of traversal of what kinds of systems they were making. And then I was doing a lot of consulting, bringing lots of teams together, and essentially trying to make whatever their products were, their dreams. And then at some point, I think I ended up having this kind of realization of the kind of consulting gig and kind of building these teams. I've seen how essentially you end up having a lot of teams getting built and then people getting hired, but then you're taking a lot of kind of cuts and cuts and cuts of people. Essentially when they keep getting hired and then they get shuffled and then getting rehired by another group or kind of staffing agencies and all these other types of middlemen. So at some point you see all these kinds of things that cause friction, right, in the system. And all this kinds of friction actually starts to inflate a bunch of costs. And then people that are developers maybe only getting paid some amount of money, they end up getting charged a huge amount at the other side. And they don't see that, right? And they're offering the services, the goods. And you wonder how do you then make it so that way you kind of democratize that process? How do you get them to connect directly with companies? How do you get them to work directly with companies? And then how do you make an ecosystem that is kind of like what a blockchain is? That kind of an ecosystem full of people to be able to connect full teams and then work with each other, not have all this friction. So that's what blockchain to me is. It's kind of creating these types of frictionless environments, decentralization, and then being able to have a bunch of people connect in other ways that normally others have kind of taken advantage of in a lot of different ways, maybe staffing or bringing people together and kind of leveraging them to build things. Right? So I think what I can do is probably kind of move on from there and kind of introduce the other two speakers. They're from Consensys. Right? Actually, you guys can come on stage. Donnie and then Al.
Yeah, I'm Donnie Benjamin. My former life, I was actually an Army officer. I was on active duty for 5 years. And I do everything I can to make sure no one ever guesses that anymore. I have been with Consensys for about 1.5 years. I joined in our headquarters in New York to work directly with Joe Lubin. So Joe Lubin was one of the founders of Ethereum. He's a co-founder of Ethereum. He started Consensys to help build out the Ethereum ecosystem. Moved to Chicago, made a pitch that we don't want to be another bi-coastal tech company that ignores the middle of the country where there's a lot of talent and a lot of industry, and want to ensure that this revolution of the internet, the middle states don't get left out. And I'd also say this: if you're new to the space, even if you're in it, it can be quite overwhelming. And there's a lot of noise, and there's a lot of not so good players, just as there are in any space. But hopefully you meet Alex and myself. You know about Consensys, and we promise to educate and enlighten as a good actor in the space. And we know there's a lot to learn. So glad you're here if you're learning. Glad you're here if you want to know more, and we will be here to support you.
Hi. All right. This is so. My name is Alex. My background's in banking and fintech. Big fan of data, big fan of marketing. I kind of saw this space and realized that this is probably the future. Keyword here is probably. I don't know, but I'm willing to put my money where my mind is and focus. So I joined Consensys about 2 months ago, and my goal is to basically grow out the community, the Ethereum community in the Chicagoland area. So what that kind of means for everybody here, and feel free to hit me up afterwards, or Joe can share my email later, is if you have an idea or you're in a big corporation and you want to understand how blockchain can be used, or you already think it can be used, come to me. If you want to have a better form of education for your corporate executives, so they're not like, what is this newfangled thing and it's just a buzzword, stop by. If you're a developer and you're full stack or Ruby on Rails, you want to learn how to do Solidity programming or something more technical, come to me and I can find a way to have Consensys help you achieve what you want. And then I'm going to pause here and ask, who here has heard of Consensys? Okay, so kind of the quick spiel that I think Donnie did as well is we have 1,200 employees across 30 plus countries, and we're always looking for interesting opportunities.
Yeah, we have well over 100 open jobs. Yeah, who wants a job? We got them.
And you get a job, and you get a job.
Pass your own space. So I encourage you to consensys.net, and there's a careers tab. I'm always happy to talk about opportunities.
All right. So I think kind of the approach was to try to do a little bit of a kind of question and answer, maybe have a perspective where I come from, I guess when I started I was more of an engineer, and then eventually I kind of moved up and started doing a lot of business deals and things of that nature, running large programs. But after I kind of switched into this space, one of the first questions that I had, and I think this would be a great one for Consensys, is I haven't actually worked with blockchain. I've worked with a lot of huge companies, large corps, and they don't know what this blockchain tech is and how they are going to take that and implement it for themselves. So even for myself, me jumping into this environment, one of the questions I have is just, what are the things that Consensys, if I were to go to Consensys as a business or a corp that I'm creating a business, right? And I wish to make something in blockchain. What are the resources that Consensys has that would help the person like me or anyone else, actually?
So I'll take this for now. Donnie, feel free to jump in. So the way I would look at it is I would first try to figure out which problem are you trying to solve. And I think if you're trying to get some experience in the blockchain technology world and just seeing what it could be used for, I think the first step is to start using it personally. I'm not saying that you go out there and buy a ton of crypto. I'm saying buy some token amount and start like using it on a day-to-day basis. And what I mean by that is we have a project called MetaMask, which I'm hoping at least a couple of you have heard of it. which allows you to basically make your web browser like Web 3.0 compliant. What that means is there's websites that accept Ethereum. You install this Chrome add-on, you transfer a nominal amount of dollars, like I have $5 in mine, it's pretty secure, and now you're basically able to test it out. That would be the first thing I would do before going for the most complicated. If you have a specific business problem, such as, hey, you need a trust list, then you have to kind of articulate that a little bit better, and then we can have a conversation. Donnie, you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, if you're in the enterprise space, we have a project called Kaleido that just announced a partnership with AWS. You can basically spin up an Ethereum instance within an organization. And I don't want to take away from the Nectarchain guys because they'll explain more about this, but when you have a private permission blockchain, you can relax certain rules and then the throughput scalability issues kind of go away. And that's something fun to play around with. There's a project called Uport, and this is something that's I've been getting really into because we have an internal application at Consensys, but essentially I use my Uport app on my phone to access it. And I think we're so used to logging in with Google, authenticating it, or Facebook, or Twitter, and then basically the only thing, I own my identity on this app, not a company. So when I log in, Consensys has attested that I work there and I'm able to log in. I don't know, there's something about it. It's awesome. It's like taking back your identity back and feeling like it's secure, right? So someone can't hack into a database and steal everybody's information. They could theoretically hack into my phone and take my information, but they're not like an Equifax style stealing 140 million records because they got into one person's computer.
Actually, that was one of the things that I kind of played with initially. I think I started looking at Truffle and then developing a simple contract just to see how this looked. And then that evolved into create soon of like a D app, but then how did I take that app and then seamlessly, if I were to transfer, I guess, tokens, right, using MetaMask, that was actually part of the quote-unquote tutorial that I found on. It's very, very integrated, very seamless, as long as you kind of have a good sense of web development and how you can connect.
Yeah, Truffle Suite, if you're a developer, that's the toolkit to develop on Ethereum. It's important. If you're developing on Ethereum, you're probably using Truffle. What is, can we ask the yeah, what's the burning question, confusion that's on people's minds?
For a non-technical person who is, I'm in finance, but this could apply to anyone in any business, trying to understand how you can apply a blockchain-based like contract system, be innovative in those situations that you're in now. Are you the kind of person people who you would turn to come up with a solution if you're not yourself like a developer, a programmer who knows all the intricacies of the technology behind it, but have an idea that there's a lot of leverage here that I can provide to my company? How do you actually get from having an idea, having an understanding what the benefits of the blockchain can bring, to actually bring it to fruition without becoming a programmer and developer yourself?
So I think it's like for example, for financial services, the best example I can think about is fraud. Fraud is a big problem in either payments or loans or anything like that, and it kind of stems from the lack of identity. Like all the money that like financial services are spending is actually trying to verify your identity. So what blockchain and the various like identity solutions allow you is that you remove the problem of knowing who's on the other end of that transaction. If you, let's say, work in Venmo or some kind of loan company, you know what your fraud rate is, and you know that if you eliminate that plus the positions, what the revenue driver is. But I think ultimately you can't, it's not like you just can't come to it and be like, oh, blockchain will solve all of this. It's more that you think that there's applications here, and then you have to start educating not only yourself, but all the executives within the company before you can actually bring it to fruition, because you need that sponsor. You need someone that's going to believe in the technology, and ultimately, unless they really see the light, you're probably not going to be able to make a lot of headway. At least that's what I've seen in just general enterprise sales. You need someone to really be a believer, and you could be the first person. That could be the way you become the blockchain expert, and start by taking a class, and then ultimately, your business domain knowledge better than anyone else. Once you know, you'll see that application if it's there.
And there are one of the major prongs of Consensys is Consensys Academy, just because educating not just developers but business people on what it is and how to utilize it is so important. So there are classes on Coursera and Udemy you can audit and take to learn more, and there's full-on developer trainings that are months long. Is that helpful?
Let me add something to this too. So, for my background, I've seen time to time, this is kind of the pattern of how things work. Something new comes into the environment, like cloud, for example. Right? And then usually I was the person who kind of go to a company, and then when the company starts asking, well, we heard of this thing called the cloud, or we heard of these things called VMs, how do we leverage this as part of our business? Then you sit down with that individual and you start talking through, well, what is your business? What do you do? I've worked from financial, I've worked in healthcare, for example, as well. And their uses could be all different. It could be even software that somebody heard about, and similarly, like blockchain, it's something that gets introduced. But then the first part of that is usually understanding what it is that your business is. But then once you get educated with this is what blockchain is and how it can actually solve a problem differently. One of the biggest use cases I think that blockchain just innately has is the concept of, and this is something that I read before coming off Nexus' site, was they had this really good Harvard Business Review article, and it was kind of portraying in the 1970s and all the way up until now, we have these databases that everyone's data is kind of in these databases and sitting in companies, right? The big problem that they're trying to solve was, how do we take this data and then make it so that way it's more decentralized, so it's spread out, right? Instead of just being in one place, how do we then take it and then take it everywhere else, and then be able to kind of pull that data in, right? And then that kind of paradigm, because data is so critical to how business works in every single business, it really comes down to then, if it's everywhere else, how do we then make that work for our business? So for example, I think I was in another session, and it was with healthcare, American Medical Association, I think it was, right? And their concepts were around, well, we have all this patient data. How do we take that data, and instead of us storing it in servers, how do we then have the patients own that data? And then how do we get that data and then leverage it instead of us holding all that data? And since it's their data, they can actually control maybe the business process would be changed. They can even control the accuracy of their own data. They can even make sure that their data is their data, right? As opposed to when it's stored by some hospital or some other company, maybe a health insurance company, they wouldn't know how to make that transition, right? Because they know how business works now and how it's going to transition in the future. So I think one of the concepts here is, it's not really about kind of the technical implementation. Technical implementation sometimes is the easiest part. It's more around, how do you change the paradigm, or how do you change the thinking? So your business, you might have a lot of business processes, how things are done right now, that you all think, well, we just log into this web application, and we know that we're going to sign in, and our data is going to be there, but it's going to be on some sort of server someplace, right? Well, now take that model and change it to some sort of blockchain philosophy. Well, then how would your business look different? And that's usually the kind of paradigm shift that people have, and that's what usually makes them think, okay, if now we don't have to store all this data, how would we get at the data, right? So it brings new challenges, and then those new challenges are usually the things that come up as part of the project, right? Those are the things that when you bring the technology in, you start having the kind of a proof of technology and proof of concepts. Right? You get a sense of, this is the way this works, but then this is how we want to make it work for our business. And what's interesting about this space so I've seen this time and time again, and maybe you can chime in here as well, is when new technology came into place, like mobile phones, right? We had no clue what this was going to look like. We would talk to companies, and companies would think, oh, we've got to make sure that the stuff is working on these mobile phones. But when you talk to them, they have no clue, and you have no clue. So it's a kind of a journey that you're both taking together. My sense is that Consensys has some of those types of experiences instead of you going off and doing those kind of just yourself. Right? There's a lot of pockets of communities where a lot of this technology comes from the community. Then we figure out, well, this is how one person uses it. Talk to somebody else in the community, and then you find another person's using it, but in a different way. You can then get a sense of, well, maybe this is another way we can use it, right, after you interact and talk with each other. Thoughts? Maybe,
I mean, I think that's an excellent point you bring up about paradigm changing, because it is. I think a lot of people who are in this space for what it's probably like the better reason, it isn't the price and the craziness of the markets. It's because there's things about the way we interact with each other in businesses and society that we just don't like, and that are unnecessarily adversarial. And there's too many value captures instead of value captures capturing value instead of value creators, and we think there's a better way. So it's this paradigm shift of how society operates in a blockchain world where the software acts as the trusted intermediary and things are instant and secure. That to me is the most fun part, and I think you have to apply how that paradigm shift can affect a business as well.
Good question. So the patient data example that you gave, so when a hospital decides to make the patient data available on the blockchain and they spin up Ethereum networks on AWS, aren't they technically still the owners of those computers which they can tamper with?
So I would actually change, I'm not a medical expert, right? I'll give you guys like the level of understanding that I have electronic medical records, and basically it's, there's like 10 or 20 different providers, and some of them can interwork with them, and obviously there's companies that do a good job doing it. I think when you look at Ethereum, the future you want to imagine is the consumer has that data. It's not on like AWS servers, it's just on the blockchain. And then all those entities are doing is they're like applying the standard GUI or standard like UI on top of the data that you control. And you give access to the hospital and you take it away. And that's the paradigm shift that I think Donnie is talking about, where like it's not their data, it's your data. And I know that, like, for example, Donnie is very passionate about, same thing for, he's a huge fan of Facebook. And where it's like, it's like our data, and it's hard for us, and this is what I've seen, and I'm new to the space, and I'll be like honest, is that you have to almost like break the way you think about this stuff, because if you keep applying the same type of thought, it's like, well, it's a server, like why would I ever like distribute this? It's so much more expensive, it's inefficient. But there's a type of efficiency that comes through it being decentralized. There's a couple of type of like true society efficiency that comes through it if you own it and no one else does, or like it's yours and you're not dependent on anyone. Donnie, you have anything to add?
I think that was beautifully said. But you also have to remember, AWS servers and Google servers or whatever in the future might be running nodes of blockchains, but you can't hack into one node without seeing out somebody's private key and accessing the information, right? The information is distributed across all the nodes, and the only way to get my information is to have my private key. So you might be able to get my private key, but you're not going to be able to get everybody's.
So I think that I guess I'll just touch on one thing, is that I think there's a kind of a concept or there's pieces that are kind of missing here, where everyone has a sense of blockchain is the thing you develop in, and then that also just comes with some sort of a web app. I think that's where there is a kind of a break where you could have this blockchain and think of it more as it's the data and it's the database, and where is it located? It's not on somebody's server, but now it's on my phone or it's on my laptop, essentially, right? Or it's shared, but then it's essentially it's in a lot of different places, right? So that way, everyone has it in some portion, but it's secured and it's something that they can access. But then, yeah, any day, I guess there's a lot of technologies that come into play where you make the app on top of that, and that's where then that's the thing that kind of accesses the data. And I think that's where, for me, it's a lot of confusion as well. Because when I kept hearing about what is blockchain, I thought, well, is this one development kit or a suite, or is this a product I take off of the shelf and I just use it? Right? It's not the case, actually. It's you build an app, say that you end up putting it on a server like AWS, say that you become not popular anymore, the data's still out there, somebody else can build another app and connect it right up to that data and work just as like it was there.
There's that.
You mentioned instantaneous. Are you working on any projects with maybe money transfer or maybe trade settlement or instantaneous basis?
There are so many examples of that in the blockchain space. I'm not a fan of it, but like Ripple's whole existence is to do that, right? It's like their one use case, and if they're good at it, who knows? But we're Stellar's trying to do that. Consensys, we have some pilot projects. I can't remember exactly where. Maybe in the Philippines, where they're working on that. But yeah, instantaneous settlement of money transfers is like a huge, great first use case of blockchain technology. Because the cost of, from what I understand, the cost of wiring money, I know it costs money and it takes time, whereas it shouldn't cost very much and it shouldn't take that much time at all. And instantaneous is tough. Probably build in some safeguards there, even if it could be instantaneous, but a whole lot faster than it is now.
Question. So I know like one of the reasons that make it difficult to make it easy is just the issue of scaling with blockchain. So I heard the term second layer scaling thrown around a few times. What is that, and is that unique to
I think that's a really good segue, actually.
We have some amazing speakers come in and talk about that here tonight. I'm excited.
So you want to introduce the...
Yeah, that works for a segue. That's actually perfect because you're about to hear about some second layer stuff. Everybody, a round of applause for Alex Gutman. All right, I'm going to bring up next Alex and Alex, but we're going to call them Chip and Alex for today because we don't want to call two guys Alex. So I give them a new name and give them a round of applause as they come on up here. We have a super cool presentation here, so I'm going to get you guys started here. Chip, take it away. Tell them about second layer.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. Super excited. Like you said, my name is Alec Gutman. People call me Chip, my co-founder, but there's Alex. So we introduce ourselves as Alex and Alec, get a little confusing. So just to differentiate a little bit. So yeah, really excited to talk to you guys about second layer solutions, kind of where we are in terms of scaling the state of Ethereum, in terms of whether it be second layer, some of the implementations like on our main protocol, but I'm probably mostly covering just second layer stuff. So let's kick it off. So the one thing that I'd like to start with when talking about this, if this will go. Perfect. So this is kind of a little outdated of a chart. It's about a month or two back, but it still shows well in terms of what we're trying to talk about. So obviously we see over here in the yellow, step down. So over here in the yellow, we see the price, which a lot of people probably started in space being very interested in. As Joe mentioned, we kind of go through our evolution of what interests us about this space. Particularly on this chart that I like to really draw on in terms of usage of this core protocol is I'm kind of blocking it, but the transactions in terms of what's going through and what's getting processed through this basically open computer that is a decentralized network. And then likewise, we see the transaction fees over in red that kind of line up at peak times on the lineup with the green here. Another interesting thing that I really like to consider is the growth, and this is unique wallet addresses, which just constantly, as you can see, are skyrocketing, which is very encouraging as we kind of move forward into, kind of seeing more of a mainstream adoption of any iteration of this, whether it be on data storage, monetary level, social networks, whatever it may be. These are the wallets that are interacting, and likewise, a really interesting stat that actually isn't up here is in terms of what's being sent, in terms of size of sends, they're actually going down. So as we see wallet numbers increase, we're seeing send size goes down. So it's pretty encouraging to see that basically the average person is possibly getting more into the space. We're seeing a little more adoption on all levels, which is really exciting as we kind of build towards hopefully some of that enterprise stuff. So this is kind of what some folks up here touched on in terms of kind of changing the paradigm in terms of how we use this technology and other things. So obviously we started with some of the innovators really giving us the platforms to do this, whether it be obviously Satoshi, leaving Bitcoin behind for us to kind of get inspired and what Vitalik put forward and some of his team members. And now we see early adopters really trying to build up on this technology. We're kind of either approaching, and I think we're here now, or soon to be, what we call the chasm. And that's basically obviously there's folks who are interested in this, and there's folks who are this is cool, but what are we gonna do with it? And that's where we see everyone calling for institutional money to come, all these enterprises, and frankly, we're just not there yet. So it kind of goes well into here in terms of this kind of layout of the ecosystem. Some similar stuff and some scaling solutions that are going alongside with Ethereum. So obviously we talked about Ripple and basically just being centralized and terrible. And then we look at EOS, with a very limited delegation in terms of moving towards centralization. But when we look towards Ethereum, what we really want to move towards is the next level of scaling, which is sharding, plasma. Some of these very interesting things that are going to help us interact on the blockchain faster, cheaper, more effectively. And that's something that we're really kind of looking forward to. And likewise, everyone's calling for, at the chasm point. I like to think of it as the chicken versus the egg in terms of, should we get more users, should we onboard more development talent, all this other stuff. Personally, I'm very big on developing the protocol, so by the time everyone comes, anyone can interact in terms of not having issues with CryptoKitties, clogging the blockchain, and now IBM's, all of IBM's Hyperledger clients can't do anything. So, it's pretty interesting to see as we move towards there. So this is kind of a good display of where we're at in terms of some of the scaling solutions. So just to kind of give everyone a quick friendly reminder, or maybe a quick learning experience. So right now, in terms of the Ethereum blockchain, every node processes every transaction, so that it has to constantly be in sync with each other to prove that a transaction can go through. So as you can imagine, that takes a very long time, especially if you're trying to build games, micropayments, you're trying to do IoT with technologies communicating with each other in terms of paying each other for services like sharing your Wi-Fi or your hotspot and having people pay at the airport that's sitting with you. These are the things that would absolutely clog our ecosystem, knowing that we can only process about 15 transactions per second. So obviously we're trying to build some of those second layer technologies to kind of aid and bring some of those main concerns off of the blockchain. So there's a few different ways that people are going about doing it. I do know that we have someone who's developing sharding coming to speak to us, so I'll kind of leave that to them because I want to stay in my lane. And then we also have someone talking a little bit about Plasma, but I'll touch on that a little bit. So Plasma is basically going to be one of the second layer solutions. That's going to be a blockchain to a blockchain. And let's kind of back that up for a second. And what that really means is we look at the main circle, Ethereum, basically is what we call the parent or the root blockchain. And then from there, it has a child blockchain. which basically operates within the same rule set, but basically is maintained solely by the participants in that ecosystem. So the only time it ever has to communicate back with the core level of Ethereum is when there's a dispute amongst those participants, which ideally would be few and far between, as we make a few different child chains for, if we want to have one exclusively for social media, exclusively for micropayments, finance, trading, whatever it may be. So that's one of the unique second layer solutions. Sharding, I'll touch on it just very briefly. It's basically the idea of splitting all of validations of, or let's back that up. It's basically splitting up the whole ecosystem of Ethereum, and instead of having to go through every node, there's different parts of the protocol that get processed by certain nodes, and then from there they come together. So not every node has to run through every single confirmation. And then we'll kind of look towards off-chain, which is kind of what Nectarchain, my team's exploring. It's basically a settlement layer, strictly for basically permission blockchains. I think Donnie touched on it with kind of some of the mechanisms you can kind of customize, because it's not directly on the blockchain. It's using the same principles, basically of the blockchain, but you kind of move it off to a customizable layer. So I'll kind of cover some of the stuff that we're doing. So you can kind of see this is a visual I like to present. It's very conceptually good for understanding like the interaction between a second layer solution and likewise how something could operate off chain. So you see these little arrows down below. That's basically our peg to get back to the main chain. So we can once we reach settlement, like I said, off chain is usually a settlement layer. So once we want to get back after we settle those transactions that aren't in the cloud or main chain. So, some of the mechanisms that we've been working with in terms of customizing, our not blockchain, but our off-chain platform is actually a pretty unique contract type within Ethereum's ecosystem. It's called an ERC-865. It actually allows you to basically print out a token that can be used as the gas to send from point A to point B within, an off-chain platform. So we're really excited about basically being able to create gas, to send Ethereum-powered assets, Ethereum tokens, whatever it may be, especially when we come to proof of stake, where people might be a little more frugal about wanting to be a staker. And for those who don't know, there's a 32 Ethereum fee to basically be a staker and a validator in the new model. So that's going to be hopefully pretty sought after. And then kind of how we're doing this, because obviously we want to ensure the state of all the transactions that are going through, because we're basically throwing a database on Ethereum's protocol with certain mechanisms to make it function. So with that, we need to constantly secure it, monitor, store all the data that runs through it, and make sure that if for some reason the system goes down, everything's set back fine, insured there. So basically, in a similar way of sharding, and I'll let the presenter dive into that. But basically, we're going to have nodes to remember some of the parts of the database in terms of what's being sent live in real time and interacting with what we're calling sentries. It's basically a watchdog. So we're having hardware and software interact with each other in the sense that we want to scale using compute power, kind of delegate that to other folks. Similar to in other ecosystems like EOS, maybe some other delegated proof of stake protocols that we're familiar with. But basically, while doing this, not only letting people earn to basically scale the network, but likewise provide each other some computation. And then another thing that we're really excited about in terms of something that's pretty sought after in terms of developments and what people are trying to add to the main chain is privacy in terms of anonymous sends, things like Monero. Things like other things like that. People are very keen, or Zcash as well. We're actually using some of the stuff that Zcash is implementing in terms of zero knowledge that's available. Basically not on chain yet, but the functionality is available to add on to a mechanism that we can customize and basically have people send things anonymously. And basically, but we'll have the database in terms of sending, and once that settles, the Merkle tree in terms of how that's remembered in the system over time, it's expunged. So once settlement happens, it basically cuts ties to let's say very linearly that's word. And if that's the memory of what you did, like we'll cut that and it'll basically just be gone. So that's pretty exciting. And also, as an off-chain platform, we don't have to use all the hardware that miners need to use to validate everything on the main chain. So in terms of how efficient we are, competitively we're very efficient. In terms of sense. So very excited about that. And stay up to date with us. Really excited to hopefully see some of you guys around. Talk a little more about what Nectarchain's second layer is and how we're going to be scaling networks and whatnot. Yeah. Questions?
What was the inspiration for the name?
Nectarchain?
Yeah.
Yeah, so first of all, probably going to go through rebrand eventually. Just throwing that out there. But the way, because we're doing a token, we were planning on distributing was through a capture airdrop. So basically, we're calling our database the Hive. So like, come in, get your nectar token, and basically, yeah, that's kind of where it came from. And the big thing about that is, in terms of an airdrop that we're excited about, is because what we're doing is very centralized to start out with. Because like we're a database on Ethereum, complicated. The participants that continue to add compute power, watch our network, and secure it, will continue to decentralize it. So like the more participants we have, obviously the more people the partition goes to in terms of who's remembering what. So we want to put that in the hands of the people so they not only have the means to send, but likewise have the means to get going and pay our first wave of people who are getting going in terms of scaling their network.
You know what? I'm going to keep the show moving on here. Everybody give a round of applause for Chip. And I only did that because I want you guys to talk to Chip when we go have beers afterwards at Highline, which is right at the corner of Wells and Kinsey. That's where all the real magic happens, of course. I wanted to share with you, what we do when we bring these different projects out is we have them go through a little bit of vetting process. So it usually starts with somebody saying, hey, my niece or my cousin has a project. And then they introduce us, and we talk a few times, and we invite them for a builder session. So for the last year, every Tuesday, we see a few different projects, 2 or 3 projects, and we bring out community coaches. So this might be legal help, marketing help, or somebody who's a real, true technology expert, an author, or somebody who is just really interested in the space and has entrepreneurial experience that they can give. And we kind of mix the experiential learning with something that can actually set the startup groups on the right path. It's a hard road to embark upon, but hopefully, by bringing people together, the builders and all these resources that are out there, and the investors, that we can just be that connector for Chicago and kind of act as an infrastructure layer for Chicago to help it become the blockchain capital of the world, which is a great goal to have because it's really difficult. So I know we'll be in business at least for a while because blockchain's got a long way to go, and it's going to be a hard goal to achieve. We won't achieve it tomorrow. It's going to take a lot of work. So if you want to participate, check out ChicagoBlockchainProject.com. We throw out an email newsletter that has all of the events that are in Chicago, not just ours, every week. So it's a great place to get on the list right there. Next up, I'm going to bring up Kathleen Riley, who has been a contributor with CVP lately and has really taken over the strategy and partnership role here. Come on up, Kathleen. Give her a round of applause.
I'm just turning these on. Should I introduce everybody?
Yep. You can introduce them. I'll get out of your way.
All right. So hi, I'm Kathleen Riley. Hi, I'm Kathleen Riley. As Joe mentioned, I'm helping with strategy of Chicago Blockchain Project. I'm also Director of Business Development for Deep Systems, which is a high-performance ecosystem in the financial sector. We also have an application called Indigo, which is an institutional-grade crypto trading platform, which is super cool. And I'm also starting a
blockchain and cryptocurrency news platform based on fact checking. So yeah, I'm really interested in crypto and excited to introduce some of these next people up here and ask them some questions. First, we have Dr. Konrad Barsky, medical doctor. He is the founder and CEO of Forward Blockchain. Originally trained as a medical doctor, Konrad has worked for 14 years at Wolters Kluwer Clinical Solutions, developing enterprise medical software. He is the author of several technical books, including Land of Lisp and Bitcoin for the Befuddled. He first became involved in blockchain technology in 2011 and is now CEO of Forward Blockchain, a company working to apply Ethereum tech in the medical space. Come on up. And next we have Donnie Benjamin. He was just up here, but I'm going to give him another intro because he's very impressive. Donnie's a Consensys Chicago regional lead. He spent 5 years in active duty in the U.S. Army, where he supported operations in 3 countries. During and after business school, Donnie transitioned into a career in technology, working at Google in operations and Qualtrics in customer success. Upon discovering Ethereum, Donnie became focused on bringing decentralized technology and systems to a global society. Donnie previously worked alongside the founder of Consensys to align internal operations and bring the best projects and people to the mesh. Welcome, Donnie. And last but not least, we have Raul Jordan. Raul is the co-founder of Prysmatic Labs and partner at ZK Capital, a Chicago-based investment fund. Prysmatic Labs is one of the main teams implementing the next iteration of the Ethereum network, including proof of stake and sharding. Prysmatic Labs works directly with the Ethereum research team to build a production quality client written in Go for Ethereum 2.0. The team has received extensive grants for the foundation, Ethereum Community Fund, Argonne, among others. Raul studied computer science at Harvard University and is a Thiel Fellow now working as a core developer, or Thiel Fellow now working as a core developer for Ethereum. Welcome, Raul. So I'm going to ask you guys some questions here. We're going to start off with Raul, if that's okay. Raul, can you tell us about something interesting like the data availability problem? I read about this Ethereum needing to solve this for proof of stake to be implemented.
Oh, okay. So this is a very technical question, and I think to give a little bit of context behind the motivation for this, I wasn't here for the earlier talk, so I apologize. But essentially in Ethereum, there are 2 types of nodes. We have full syncing nodes that are aware of the entire state of the network, and we also have light clients, which only verify particular parts of the state. So most people are not going to run a full node. It's really expensive. It takes up a lot of storage. But the great thing is that that's what really gives the security to the network, right? Everyone is aware of every transaction happening in the network. We all know what's going on. The problem with kind of sharding and things like partitioning the state is that then you don't have a concept of everyone being fully aware of every occurrence in the network, right? So you get into weird situations, like imagine the story of the boy who cried wolf, where you don't know if it's the boy that's telling the truth or if it's a whistleblower that's lying. So in particular, in this case, like say we split the Ethereum network into 1,024 blockchains, which is what we're going to do for Ethereum 2.0. Then not everyone is aware of everything happening across all the different smaller blockchains called shards. So in particular, like if you ask for a particular part of the state and somebody lies about it, or lies about the fact that this data is available, you don't really know who to trust. Is maybe this person that I trusted to tell me where the data was, are they lying or are they telling the truth? So we run into this thing called like the speaker-listener fault equivalence, which is a very common problem, kind of in in general, we're all aware of. And actually, the specification for Ethereum 2.0 has actually allowed us to kind of get around this problem in some interesting ways. So if you guys are more technically oriented and interested about this, happy to chat after. But yeah, it's a very relevant problem when you're not aware of everything happening in the state of the world.
Thank you. Konrad, can you talk to us about privacy a bit?
Yes, so since I work in the medical space, we're trying to use blockchain, find blockchain use cases in the medical field. And the bottom line is it's a really complicated question of how you address mixing privacy and blockchain tech. In the near term, the easiest solution is to just not worry about it, to just focus on use cases where privacy is an issue. And in terms of strong privacy, clearly Bitcoin has certain privacy aspects, but it's not really private in a cryptographically secure sense. People can figure out who you are if they analyze the network and have a limited amount of data about the information. So if you want to get beyond that and you want to have real privacy, such as putting somebody's patient's blood pressure on some sort of blockchain, you have to figure out some mechanism to keep it private. And there's basically three ways to do it. One is you just have a private blockchain in a data center, which was brought up with the panel earlier, where you use an AWS instance or something. The problem then, of course, is that you have some degree of centralization, so then the question is it really more useful than just using a database? Another way you can try to work around the privacy problem is to use encryption. But it turns out when you look at the different ways of using encryption, traditional forms of encryption, the problem is that to do something useful with data, you need to be able to decrypt it. And especially with smart contracts, which is sort of the most valuable part of Ethereum, if the smart contract can't read the data, is it really worth putting it on the blockchain if it's encrypted and the key isn't available? And if you come up with some other scheme for how people would get the key, then the question is, well, why didn't you just, if they have to go to some special place to get the key, why didn't you just put the data in that special place? So these are sort of the hard questions. The final solution is to use what is called like zero knowledge encryption or homomorphic encryption. So these are like very exotic forms of cryptography that allow you to do private computation on a blockchain. And that is probably where these things are eventually going to go in terms of being able to take a medical record and stick it onto some sort of public blockchain and to still be certain that only the authorized parties can access it. I think that's probably where we would eventually go, but we're a long time away from really having a practical approach for building a system like that. So the bottom line is it's very complicated, and in general, if you have a use case for blockchain and it requires privacy, I would recommend coming up with a different use case for now, until people have sorted these things out.
Thank you. Raul, what will the benefits be when we reach Serenity?
Oh, so for those that are a bit unfamiliar with Serenity means, so Serenity is Serenity is kind of the word we're using for Ethereum's next upgrade. So that's going to include proof of stake and sharding, which is going to make allow for greater security, more decentralization, and a high degree of scalability, right? So what's interesting here is that essentially we're going to have, like I said, 1,024 kind of Ethereum blockchains all happening at once, sharing the same security pool. And you're going to have the ability to kind of increase your throughput by an order of almost 1,000 magnitude. So you're going to be able to have a lot more industry adoption, have a lot more people that want to build useful applications of public blockchains, have the ability to do something that scales to the degree that something centralized would. So we'll see a lot more interesting ideas coming together. A lot of people that have been kind of holding back from implementing something on Ethereum are going to come in and really do a lot more. So at that point, really, like the network will become something that can be truly useful for the mainstream, and it'll be, essentially it'll be fulfilling its original promise of being the world computer. I think Vitalik puts it nicely. He says that Ethereum today was like a scrappy group of people's attempt to create a world computer that like kind of works, kind of doesn't. Most of the time, it's barely functioning. But Ethereum 2.0 is actually going to be the world computer. And I think there's been a lot of years learned, a lot of lessons learned, and overall I think we're pretty confident with the roadmap for the project. So yeah.
Thank you. This question is for Conrad and Donnie. Who is the most interesting person you've met in space? And can you tell us a very short story about why you think so?
Well, it's hard to come up with something on the spot. I mean, I've certainly met Vitalik. Obviously, that's interesting. But I actually had nothing really to talk with him about because, like I followed all his blogs and stuff and agree with everything he says. was kind of awkward. It's like I realized I didn't actually have a question for him because I already knew what he would say because I'm in the same mindset. So yeah, so I can't really come up with anything.
Well, I'm just struggling because I have a lot of stories working with Joe. And I'm just trying to pick one, and it's really difficult. I just think his mindset is to.
Are we talking about Joe Lubin?
Joe Lubin.
Okay, yeah.
Or Disruption Joe. Could be.
That's why I jumped in.
Just because his whole mindset, he spends hardly any time sleeping and a lot of time just working to get this technology out in the world to improve society or in the ways that he thinks it's broken, and I think we all agree with, so we come to consensus. And it's just it's so nice to see somebody who is really focused on not like just ROI or short-term returns, but is thinking like super long-term, very patient with capital, and I don't feel like I see that a lot. And he's just the epitome of so many good traits that I aspire to have. I think it's maybe one good story will come to me later, but that's what I can say.
Great. I think we can open up questions to the audience now. Anybody has any specific for anybody up here?
Hello. This question is for the person that was the developer of Ethereum. You were talking about proof of stake coming out in Serenity. And what advice would you give for people that wanted to enter the mining game and start literally, building setups for mining here in Chicago? Because I was thinking about doing that. I was wondering what type of things you have to say about that. That was on topic of what you were saying.
So one of the main motivations for Ethereum's move to proof of stake is we want to eliminate mining. We want to eliminate kind of ways like spending electricity to kind of secure a network and like having these kind of really expensive rigs and machines. And there's a lot of arguments kind of pro and con, but since the beginning, Ethereum has always planned to go to proof of stake. And with proof of stake, that means that you don't need kind of an expensive GPU rig or anything to secure the network. Instead, you use your Ether, your actual currency, your cryptocurrency to secure the network. So what you need to do for Serenity is you need to acquire 32 Ether or 16 Ether, which is something that we're going to be working on to have the requirement have. And then you're going to be able to look out for testnets. So testnets are going to be coming out in Q1 2019-ish, Q2. And at that point, you're going to be able to kind of use the Ether that you have to run what we call a validator client, which is this piece of software that kind of just validates blocks and makes sure that things are secure in the network, and you get rewarded for it. You get a reward for basically performing this duty. And if you do anything malicious, you get your deposit cut. So as long as you're acting correctly, you're doing your job properly, you should be fine. So those are the two steps: just like acquire enough Ether, and I think right now is a really good time. Yeah, don't worry about buying expensive mining rigs. Don't worry about electricity expenses. Ideally, you'd be able to run one of these on your personal computer, and that's one of our design goals, and we're really moving towards that.
When you say that part of the staked funds will get cut, is that like a defense feature, like to protect against an attack or something?
Yeah, so proof of stake is compared to proof of work. Proof of work is a system based on rewards. So basically we're rewarding the person that is able to find a solution to a hard mathematical problem first among everyone in the world. So people compete in this giant global contest to get a Bitcoin kind of block reward or an Ethereum block reward. In proof of stake, it's a system based on punishments. So instead, everyone just locks up some amount of capital for some amount of time, and you do your responsibilities. And if you do anything that's malicious, or if you try to do something that's actively evil, you'll get cut.
What would be a definition of that?
So in proof of stake, you basically have to vote on blocks. So you basically broadcast a vote on what you think the next head of the chain should be. One of the conditions, we call them slashing conditions, is broadcasting a vote for two conflicting heads that are equally valid but like conflicting. So you have this, you're basically trying to maximize your reward, but like you're trying to just, you're acting against what the protocol defines. And some of the slashing conditions are a little bit more complex, as I'd have to explain more terminology. But yeah, basically it's a defense. As long as you're doing your job correctly and you're not actively trying to like screw things over, you'll be fine. You won't get your deposit cut. Another thing is if you're offline for a very long time, then you'll start to leak your deposit. So you start to lose Ether gradually until eventually you lose everything. Well, that's something that's a little bit different.
So I understand that with staking, you have to be online all the time in order to not have your funds slashed or reduced over time. Is there any kind of work that is going towards not like a staking pool, but something where you'd be able to stake personally and not have to guarantee continuous connection?
Sure, there are staking pool models where basically are companies where maybe you don't have 32 Ether, you have a little bit, you can stake it, you'll earn some interest, this company will manage these things for you, and that's kind of the model that is probably the most popular. I think aside from that, if you want to be your own validator, then you're probably going to have to be careful and run it carefully because you have a lot of money at stake. So any other solution would be compromising security to some extent. So we'd ideally, if you want to be a validator, you should be in charge and responsible for keeping it online. Right? And we want to minimize how much you would lose by like flaky connections, or maybe your power went out for one day. So that's why we have this leak, which like over a period of time you start to lose your deposit, but like it's not going to be accidents happen, and you're not going to get cut because of that.
Does it get burned?
Does it get burned? It gets cut, and it actually, we're still thinking about it, exactly what's going to happen, but a lot of it is going to go towards kind of the inflation of giving it to other participating validators.
I have a question about privacy, which isn't surprising. So what do you think when you start talking about some of these exotic solutions, right, and that we're inevitably heading there? What do you think is the timeline on something like that? How does Ethereum, I know none of you speak for Ethereum, right? But like, how do you think about Ethereum integrating some of these solutions themselves, like beyond zero knowledge proofs? What do you think of things like secure multi-party computation? And again, what's like the timeline? Are you guys thinking like 2 and 3 years out, or are you thinking even further? Because I build privacy first. I want to know, how long it takes.
Well, it's really anyone's guess, because somebody could come up with an awesome toolkit that makes it really easy to build private applications. But right now, like I kind of view privacy, these exotic privacy ideas, very similar to the semantic web. Like there was this idea that all the web pages, would have all kinds of ontologies embedded with them inside of them that would tell you what everything is, and different websites would integrate with each other using these ontologies. But what people started realizing is that you needed to have a PhD to create the correct ontologies for a website, and so nobody ever built anything meaningful with the semantic web. And the whole idea fell apart because of that. And that's where we are with these exotic privacy things. So people have figured out how to do it for very limited domains, like for money transfer. So Zcash really has a robust model for secure private money transactions. But if you start talking about using it for anything else, like in the medical space, there's really like only 100 people in the world that have the PhD and the understanding of the level of cryptography to be able to build the proper algorithms that are done in the correct, secure way to build an application using these exotic technologies. And just like with the semantic web, that means it's dead in the water. So the question is, will people find out ways of making it easier for an average developer to build something with this level of privacy, or will that never happen? And if that's the case, then it could take a very long time. I don't know.
We included zero knowledge proofs in Serenity. Not at the moment, it's not a plan. I mean, there's already some zero knowledge proof support, but like Conrad's saying, it requires a lot of understanding, a lot of crazy stuff to wrangle before you can actually do meaningful stuff with it. There is still no plan. I think the closest company that's working on this is Starkware. It's like really cool. They're working on these zero knowledge proofs that are doing some really interesting things about computation. And these are some of the best people in the world working on that. But I have no idea about their timelines.
Now that said, the sharding stuff has a lot of really cool cryptography. So if you go to the ETH Research Forum, there's lots of geeky stuff for people interested in that subject, though not specifically zero knowledge proofs as much right now.
I have a question. I'm sure everyone's seen the price sell-off in crypto and Ethereum, and what effects on the Ethereum, either in the development community or business side, have you seen with the price sell-off? Whether for Donnie in Consensys, does it change any business relationships or business plans, or do you see? I guess has there been any change at all, or can you just comment on that, please?
No, I mean, I've been through so many of these ups and downs since I've been in. Like, I think if you start to let it get to you, you're gonna lose your mind. So I think at a certain point, we just don't even think about the price. We're just focused on building. And I think if you look at the like every metric continues to go up except for a certain time period, the price. So developers building on it, commits, venture funding going into blockchain companies, governments putting out MOUs for blockchain projects. I mean, everything keeps going up. And I think most people, realize these are distributed, unregulated exchanges that are very easily manipulated by, if Dogecoin is going to be worth $200 million, like it's clearly there's something off, right? I mean, you like Dogecoin a little bit, right? Yeah. But I think if we let some of the stuff get to us, like it's just a distraction, and we believe that there's extreme long-term value in a few of these crypto projects.
Now, I myself am a complete diehard into this technology, and I totally believe in the long-term vision. There's no doubt that your average CEO of a hospital or whatever, that they hear about blockchain, they can kind of see how it might apply to their business, and because of this giant hype bubble that we had last year, they were somewhat forgiving about being able to come up with concrete use cases in the short term, because they figure, well, there's so much excitement about it, there must be some value there that just hasn't shown itself yet. Now we're kind of in a situation where both the prices are low, and I would say that the use cases are still kind of further behind than some of us were hoping, definitely than I've been hoping. I think Ethereum has done really well on lots of metrics, but in terms of like your average person, professional, using it for something meaningful in their job, that hasn't really taken off yet, that use case. And so those two factors together, the fact that there's a lull in the hype, and that we can't really prove ROI on this technology in the short term, makes it harder to kind of sell this to enterprise customers and stuff. But yeah, I think that this is just kind of a temporary situation.
But I'd say a lot of Consensys products don't have a hard time selling this stuff in enterprises. I mean, right. When people are educated, they understand it, and especially how you can build a private permission one and then eventually connect it to the main chain when it's overcoming these issues. We're all, this guy's trying to solve. I think we've seen they get it, and they want to get ahead of the curve.
I can speak a little bit on the institutional side of things. I work a lot with hedge firms, quant, family offices, and it seems like all the big people are kind of lining up right at the edge. Everybody's interested and wants to know things, but the big problem is compliance, and the SEC is it's a big roadblock right now to people with the big money jumping in. But our office, for instance, we are running all of our Ethereum rigs. We probably have 15 big ones that are all the way up to here and a couple of rows deep. So there's a lot of interest there from the institutions and the traders, but yeah, we have a long ways to go in terms of compliance and having them ready to fully jump in.
Raul, I wanted to know a little bit about the Prysmatic Labs got a few different grants and stuff. So you've had a great run with grants actually from the Thiel Fellowship, and then through with Prysmatic Labs with the Ethereum Community Fund, and there have been some others. Can you tell us a little bit about the process of how you started those relationships, how you found out what they were looking for, and if you were building something and then they said, we want to fund that, or if you looked at it and said, I'm going to build a company around what they're looking for?
Yeah, no, good question. So to give some context, Prysmatic Labs, we're an open source development team. We're 6 people right now, and essentially we started because we're like, okay, like we really love Ethereum, we want to contribute, we were originally contributors to some of the clients, and we're like, nobody's working on like proof of stake sharding. This was like at the turn of like 2017. So we started putting together a repo, and we started just hacking together on it. And it was actually, 2018 was I think the best year for kind of development teams and open source and crypto, because there's been such a wave of like grant support for these teams. So meaning that like, if you're just, if you have a side project, you're working on this, you want to help make the ecosystem better, there are a lot of organizations that are willing to fund you like significantly to do this and to actually make it a reality. So we received funding from the Thiel Foundation. They were super happy to have be working on this. It's a win-win for everyone, right? And that's the way a lot of these companies are thinking about the grant ecosystem. So I mean, it's not just teams; individuals also get grants. So if you have a project, you're working on privacy, you're working on something with scalability. It can be across the whole spectrum, even across usability and like end user applications. You can actually receive grants from various organizations. And I think it's a really, really cool concept, right? Like, we don't really see the other teams working on this competition. Instead, like the power of Ethereum comes from the fact that we need multiple implementations of kind of the same things. So right now, the main chain, you can either use Get, which is a Go Ethereum project, or Parity, and a few others. But like the more of these we have, the better. And I think the community really understands that. So yeah, we've been really lucky with that. As for the process, like really it's just about kind of getting something out there, getting your name out there, just kind of get hacking, build something out, talk to some of these people, talk to me, I'm happy to make intros. And like I said, like if you're working on something meaningful, it's going to improve the ecosystem for the better. There will be capital opportunities for you or for your team, I think. It's been a great year for that.
We have time for one more question, and then big thank you to 1871, our hosts here. Give them a round of applause, everybody. One more question, and I'm going to ask you to come down to Highline at Kinsey and Wells if you want to join us for more discussion, because they do have another event coming in this evening.
Hi, my question is about scaling. So one of the issues with Ethereum has been when a single exchange or dApp uses a disproportionate number of transactions. So back in November, December, you had the issue with CryptoKitties, and since then there have been many other occasions when a single dApp drives up the wheat price to like 100, and the whole ecosystem grinds to a halt because it's way too expensive to do anything. So what are the solutions that are being worked on to solve this? Like, will Serenity address this? And along the lines of greater adoption, when it comes to user adoption and user experience, you have external issues like it's more difficult to buy Ethereum than Bitcoin, and MetaMask, which many people use for wallets, is very buggy. And these issues might cause people to go to other blockchain technologies or currencies. So what are your opinions on these problems which might prevent Ethereum from scaling?
I'll let you tackle the obvious one, but I think there's such constant innovation. Because I remember having MetaMask back in the day, and it was very buggy, but it's become I think it's a very good extension. And the mobile app's coming out next year, and it's going to be a top of the line app. And I think there was something else besides MetaMask I just wanted to clarify. Yeah, I don't know why it's harder to buy Ethereum than Bitcoin. If you go to Coinbase or Gemini, you can buy both. Just the same. So I guess I don't understand that part.
Well, you have to have a certain level of technical expertise to, use those exchanges. So, like nowadays, there are companies that have, let's say, like ATM machines or various like physical locations where you can buy crypto. But those are just Bitcoin or Litecoin.
opposed to Ethereum?
I have heard of Bitcoin ATMs, but I also think they're two very different blockchains serving two very different purposes. So I don't know if you can actually compare them, I think, in the way you want to. But yeah, I don't know why. I'm sure there's an Ethereum ATM somewhere, but I don't know. You want to address the other scaling issues of Serenity?
Sure, then I'll let Conrad take but yeah, so Serenity will address the issue of like gas prices going up. So the issue with gas prices going up is that when the blocks become really full, basically there's this huge supply and demand game to like get my transaction in first, and then like they become a lot more expensive. So it's not really about one single DApp blocking network. Of course, that's one of the catalysts for that, but it can be like if the whole network becomes popular, then we'll have this problem, right? With Serenity, you're going to be basically partitioning the blockchain into 1,024 different copies. So essentially, you'll have so much throughput. You won't have to basically wait for every transaction to be processed sequentially. So you're going to have parallelization, and you're going to have basically speeds equivalent to centralized services. So you won't get into a situation where the whole network is full and like your transaction is very deep into the queue because they can be processed in parallel by tons of nodes across the network. So yeah, I mean, unless we break even past that, like 10,000 plus or more, and like 100,000 transactions per second count, then you'll probably have issues. Yeah, but I mean, these problems are going to be addressed by sharding and yeah, by the whole overhaul.
So talking about the scalability issue, so I'm a big fan of the work that Prysmatic has been doing, and a big believer in the Vitalik and the Ethereum Foundation. But this issue that everybody does not hold everyone else's transactions, and we have to have certain availability guarantees for data is a really thorny one. And lots of projects have failed trying to implement that. And the few that haven't like officially failed, like there's some iffy questions. Like one example is Swarm, which was a second layer solution that kind of seems to have fallen by the wayside. That's part of the Ethereum project. As far as I know, they never implemented their incentive system for rewarding people for hosting swarms. And IPFS also, which is kind of the biggest in that type of data storage space, that their incentive system is still a bit shaky. So this is a really hard problem. And certainly, I think if any team can solve it, it's the people at Ethereum. But that's the thing to look out for. Can they solve that problem? And if they do, then I think the Ethereum 2.0 is going to have a lot of promise.
Great. Anything else? All right, we're going to wrap it up here. I want to thank all of our presenters for coming and answering questions. Chicago blockchain community is very special. I've never seen anything like it before. We hope for all of your continued involvement, and I want to give a round of applause for Joe for putting this all together. We hope to see all of you guys again, and we'll be at the Highline afterwards. Thank you guys.
No, I wanted the last two. They're so good.